Money leaves clues. Not the obvious ones, not the supercars parked outside luxury hotels or designer logos visible from across the street. Those are the clues everyone notices. The more interesting clues are the ones most people walk past every day without a second thought. Because in Britain, genuine wealth has often developed a strange habit. It becomes quieter over time. This isn't because wealthy people are trying to hide, nor does it mean every rich person avoids expensive things. Plenty don't. The point is statistical rather than absolute. When researchers study wealth instead of income, a pattern appears repeatedly. Many people with substantial assets don't necessarily look wealthy in the way popular culture expects. Meanwhile, many people who appear wealthy are simply displaying high spending rather than high net worth. Those are two completely different financial positions. This matters because our brains naturally confuse visible consumption with financial success. It's easier to notice a luxury watch than an investment portfolio. Easier to notice an expensive holiday than 20 years of disciplined saving. Easier to admire someone spending money than someone quietly keeping it. The result is that many people spend their lives copying the appearance of wealth instead of understanding the behavior that often creates it. So in this video, we're going to do something a bit different. We're not going to promise you that copying these habits will make you rich, because that's not how probability works, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. Instead, we're going to look at what the research actually says about the people in this country who have money and don't show it, what behaviours cluster around them, and why those behaviours are the boring, unglamorous engine underneath almost every quiet fortune. Let's get into it. The gap the numbers keep exposing. Start with the single most important distinction in personal finance, because almost everything else follows from it. Income is not wealth. Income is what lands in your account. Wealth is what's left after your life has taken its cut. These are two completely different quantities, and a huge chunk of the population confuses them constantly. Here's why that matters. You can earn an enormous salary and be, in net terms, broke. A surgeon on $250,000 a year with a leased car, a wardrobe of designer everything, 3 holidays booked on finance, and nothing set aside is not wealthy. They're a high-income spender, which is a very different animal. Meanwhile, someone on a modest, unremarkable salary who has spent 30 years buying less than they could afford and letting the difference grow can quietly accumulate a genuinely serious net worth. The classic research on this, the work behind The Millionaire Next Door, which studied the actual balance sheets of ordinary millionaires, found this again and again. A large share of the people who had built real wealth had never earned a spectacular income. What they had done was consistently spend well below their means for decades. And a large share of the people who looked wealthy, who lived in the expensive postcodes and drove the expensive cars, had shockingly little to show for it once you added up what they owned and subtracted what they owed. That study was American, but the mechanism is universal, and in Britain it plays out in its own distinctly understated way. The Office for National Statistics runs a long-running survey of household wealth, and one of the quietly startling things it reveals is how much of the country's total wealth sits with people who would never describe themselves as rich. Wealth in the UK is far more concentrated than income, and a lot of the people holding it are not the ones flashing it. The loudest spenders are frequently running on leverage. The quiet ones are running on ownership. That's the gap, and it's the reason your instinct in that room of 100 people betrays you. Why the genuinely wealthy so often go quiet. Before we get to the specific signals, it's worth understanding the why, because it makes the signals make sense, rather than just being a checklist. There's an old idea in economics called conspicuous consumption, the notion that people buy visible, expensive things partly to broadcast status. And for a long time, that's how status worked. If you had money, you showed it, because showing it was the point. But something has shifted, and social researchers have a name for the newer behavior: inconspicuous consumption. The idea is that as flashy luxury goods became mass market and accessible on finance, the actual signaling value of the logo collapsed. When anyone can spread the cost of a designer handbag over 12 months, carrying one stops telling anyone you're wealthy. It just tells them you wanted one. So the people with real, secure money increasingly opt out of that game entirely. Their status signals became quieter, more coded, legible only to other insiders.
Instead of a giant logo, it's the cut of a plain coat that costs more than the logo one but says nothing to the untrained eye. Instead of a loud car, it's a very ordinary-looking estate that happens to be specced in a way only another owner would clock. The whole point is that it doesn't read as wealth to the general public, and that discretion is itself the flex. There's also a plainer, less philosophical reason, and it's the one that actually correlates with net worth. People who accumulate wealth tend to be genuinely indifferent to signaling in the first place. They didn't get quiet as a strategy, they were always quiet, and staying quiet is part of how they got there. Someone who never felt the pull to prove their worth through their possessions simply had more money left over at the end of every month, every year, every decade. The quietness and the wealth aren't two separate things, they're the same underlying trait viewed from two angles. Signal 1. The deliberate absence of upgrades. So what does this look like in the wild? The first and most reliable tell is almost nothing at all. It's an absence. The quiet wealthy tend to hang on to things far longer than their finances require. The car that's 8 years old and immaculate. The phone that's 2 generations behind and works perfectly well. The kitchen that's dated but functional. To an outside eye, this reads as thrift, maybe even as being a bit skint. In reality, it's a specific psychological posture. Their sense of self is not attached to the newness of their objects, so the constant churn of upgrades that drains everyone else's cash flow simply doesn't happen to them. Think about what an upgrade actually is. It's a decision to convert accumulated money back into a slightly nicer version of something you already own and were perfectly happy with yesterday. Do that across cars, phones, watches, gadgets, furniture, and holidays, year after year, and you've built a machine that quietly disassembles your wealth as fast as you can assemble it. The quiet wealthy have that machine switched off, not because they're joyless, but because they've decided very deliberately what's worth spending on, and everything else gets left alone. The result is that their spending is lumpy and considered, rather than a constant low hum of small luxuries. And it's that constant low hum, the daily, painless, forgettable spending, that does more damage to most people's net worth than any single big purchase ever will. Signal 2. Quality that refuses to advertise itself. The second signal is subtler, and it's where people get it backwards. The quiet wealthy are not automatically cheap. Many of them will spend a genuinely eye-watering amount on a single item, only when that item meets 2 conditions. 1. It lasts. 2. It doesn't shout. This is the buy-it-for-life instinct taken to its logical conclusion. A very well-made pair of shoes that gets resold for 20 years works out cheaper per wear than the fast fashion pairs you replace every 18 months. And it also happens to look like nothing in particular to a stranger. The value is in the construction, not the branding. The same logic runs through the wardrobe, the luggage, the tools, the everyday objects. They're paying for engineering and longevity, and the fact that these things are invisible as status symbols is a feature, not a bug. You can actually see this at the level of entire brands. There's a category of British and European makers whose products are eye-wateringly expensive and almost completely unrecognizable to the general public. The quiet coat brands, the understated leather goods, the watchmakers whose pieces cost as much as a car but look like a plain dress watch from 10 feet away. These exist precisely to serve people who want the quality without the semaphore. If you know, you know. If you don't, you see a plain jumper. That deliberate illegibility is the entire product. Signal 3. The calm around money itself. Here's a signal that has nothing to do with objects at all, and it might be the most diagnostic one of the lot. The quiet wealthy tend to have a strikingly relaxed, almost boring relationship with money as a topic. They don't perform scarcity, and they don't perform abundance. They rarely mention prices. They don't announce what things cost, either to complain about it or to brag about it.
The genuinely secure often just seem a bit indifferent to the whole subject, and that indifference is expensive to buy. It comes from having a buffer thick enough that ordinary financial weather doesn't reach you.
This shows up in behavior too. They tend to make decisions slowly and without urgency because they're rarely forced into a corner by cash flow. They can wait for the right thing. They can walk away from a deal. They're not the person putting a big purchase on a card because the opportunity is now or never, because for them almost nothing is now or never. That optionality, the ability to say no, to wait, to not need it, is one of the truest markers of real wealth, and it's completely invisible from the outside. Signal 4. Automation over willpower. Dig into the actual mechanics of how quiet wealth gets built, and you find something almost anticlimactic. It's not heroic discipline exercised fresh every single day, it's structure. The people who accumulate reliably tend to have removed the decision from the equation entirely. The behavioral research here is consistent, and it's genuinely one of the most useful findings in all of personal finance. When saving and investing are automatic, they happen. When they rely on willpower, they mostly don't. The quiet wealthy overwhelmingly fall into the first camp. Money is moved before it can be spent. Standing orders fire on payday. Contributions go up quietly when income does, and the amount left in the current account to be spent is simply whatever's left after the future has already been paid. They've essentially reverse-engineered their own psychology. Instead of trying to resist temptation with every discretionary purchase, they've arranged their finances so the tempting money never touches their hands in the first place. And crucially, this is the one signal on this entire list that is genuinely within anyone's reach. You can't magic up a higher income overnight, but automating the gap between what you earn and what you spend and pointing that gap at long-term ownership, that's a structural change almost anyone can make, and it's the exact mechanism sitting underneath most of the quiet fortunes in this country. Not a secret, not a trick, just a system that runs whether or not you feel like it that month. Signal 5. They invest in things that don't photograph. The final signal is about where the money actually goes, and it's the clearest dividing line between looking rich and being rich. Spenders convert money into things that depreciate and photograph well. The quiet wealthy convert money into things that appreciate and photograph terribly. A line in an investment account does not look like anything. A slowly growing pension pot is not a flex you can wear to dinner. Ownership of productive assets that quietly generate returns is about as visually boring as money gets, and that's precisely why the people accumulating it can be sitting on serious wealth while looking utterly unremarkable. Their net worth lives in places you can't see, doing work you can't watch, compounding in a way that produces no Instagram content whatsoever. The loud spender's money is on display and evaporating. The quiet accumulator's money is hidden and growing. Same starting pounds, completely opposite trajectories, and the only visible difference is that the person doing it right looks less impressive. So here's the whole thing in one breath. The wealthy but quiet in Britain aren't hiding some secret you don't have access to, they're just running a different set of defaults. They keep things longer than they have to. They pay for quality that doesn't announce itself. They're calm about money because they've built a buffer that makes calm affordable. They automate the gap between earning and spending instead of white-knuckling it, and they park their money in the boring, invisible, appreciating things rather than the exciting, visible, depreciating ones. None of it is glamorous, all of it is legible in the data, and the least dramatic behaviors turn out to be the load-bearing ones. The reason you'd get that room of 100 people wrong is that you've been trained your whole life to read the wrong signals, to equate visible spending with wealth, when across the population it's very often the reverse. The quiet wealthy simply opted out of the performance, and opting out was never a costume, it was the cause. If this video has changed the way you think about wealth and made you realize that the truly wealthy often don't look the way we expect, then make sure you subscribe. I'd also love to hear from you. Which of these signs stood out the most, and which one are you planning to put into practice over the next month? Leave a comment below because I read every one of them, and it's always fascinating to see which lessons resonate most. And before you go, don't miss the video on your screen now. It explores the opposite side of the story by looking at the habits of people who appear wealthy but are often struggling behind the scenes. Understanding both perspectives can completely change the way you judge financial success. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.